Welcome to Asia Global Online. My name is Alejandro Reyes. I'm Director of Knowledge Dissemination at the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. Asia Global Institute, we publish Asia Global Online, the digital journal of the Institute. Currently featured on Asia Global Online is an article by our colleagues at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University, Christopher Lim and Victor Savage, who's a senior visiting fellow. In their article, Chris and Victor look at the US-China competition. In particularly, they consider Graham Allison, the Harvard political scientist, and his concept of the Thucydides trap, which basically says that if you have a kind of incumbent hegemon and a challenger, that it's inevitable that they will come to blows, that there will be some kind of hard war between them. And their argument in their article is that it's not really about a hard war anymore. It's more about economics and power and influence, economic power and influence. And they asked this question with the context of COVID-19, will COVID-19 kind of accelerate the arrival of a new Chinese world order, a new geopolitical reality? So welcome, Victor. It's very nice to see you here, and you're coming to us from Singapore. I'm wondering if I could just start by asking you about Allison's Thucydides trap concept, because this is a really quite in vogue, this concept these days. It's gained a great deal of currency over the past couple of years. You are saying that the focus for the battle of these hegemons is really about economics, economic influence and power, if you will, and not about a hard war. But surely it is in the security sphere where the US and China are increasingly coming to friction. I mean, if you think about the South China Sea, the Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Strait, there are many potential security conflicts there. Is not the trap set for a hard war just as much as it is for a battle royale over economic and financial might? I'm wondering if you could just go deeper into your thesis.
Okay, thank you very much, Al, for that introduction, and thank you for summing up Allison's theory. What we're trying to show is that in Allison's theory, in the 14 examples that he showed with the Thucydides particular model, they were all very hot wars that happened in the past. And I think that the time of hot wars has changed a lot, partly because obviously, we have entered a period of nuclear warheads, which makes wars very difficult for many countries to get involved in, because it means their annihilation, not only of one country, but many countries, or for that matter, the whole world. So in a way, it's put a damper to basically hot wars between the major 5-6 hegemons that are around. And what they have done during the Cold War period was to increase these kinds of hot wars in proxy wars, like Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, and all these places. So what we're showing here in this article is that times have changed now, and that countries have a whole arsenal of basically influences and impacts on each other. And one of them is obviously the economic aspect. Without trying to get into a hot war, what America is trying to do to China is to break it internally by applying tremendous economic pressure so that there will be an internal revolt in China, either by urban riots and rebellions, etc., like what's happening in the US right now. And if that is done, then Xi Jinping and his lifelong presidency will be in great jeopardy. And it might topple him. Even before he can get into a hot war, the Chinese leadership might buckle under that strain of economic pressure that is being applied to them. And the same thing is done to China. I mean, they are also while America is applying this economic pressure, it's having a backfire on the American economy as well. And, China is now applying a lot of economic pressure on the Americans. And that's the thing that is worrying Trump, because he's got 5 months more for his re-election. And he might not be re-elected as a result of the Chinese economic pressure, because there's 40 million people in America that are unemployed. The whole economy is up in a mess. There are hundreds and thousands of bankruptcies going on. So you see, without getting into a real war between the two of them, they could easily apply so much pressure, because now they are basically on the same wavelength. Both are capitalistic countries. There's no more communist versus a capitalist, because China has gone very capitalist. That's why the impact that America is applying can have such a devastating effect on China. If China was a closed economy, capitalism will not be able to influence at all. But because she's been so capitalistic and so open and exporting so much stuff around the world, she's very open and very susceptible to tremendous amount of economic pressure by the Americans.
So, in fact, that brings me to then the question of decoupling. This, again, is another concept that's gained a lot of currency in recent years. Is that what's happening? I mean, I personally am not a great believer that decoupling can even happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Chinese and the Russians are trying, in a way, to decouple the American economy, because the American economy is based basically on petrodollars. When they made sure that everything that was done in terms of the sale of petrol was done through U.S. currency, and that gave them a tremendous legacy of the world's financial systems. But I think the Chinese have been trying very much to decouple and make sure that everyone is also seen as an international currency. Obviously, it needs, to a large extent, a global trust in that currency, whereas the American dollar is trusted by most countries around the world. The Chinese yuan is too very flimsy, because China is still a developing country, not a developed country, so its currency doesn't have. But the Chinese are doing a lot of things. They're going into all sorts of different systems, e-commerce systems, where you don't have to actually bother about currencies, and everything can be paid straight away back to China. It doesn't have to go through banks, in fact. So they are trying their best to try to shake the American economy by trying to make sure the American currency is destabilized to a large extent. And there are obviously situations now which show the American economy is actually fluctuating because of all the issues, the fluctuation of oil prices, etc. So the Americans themselves have to be worried about this. It's hard to say what the end goal is going to take place, But the Chinese are obviously very clear that they want to make sure to move the world economy out of the American Union. And to be frank with you, the American economy is so badly in debt. There's 16 trillion in debt as a result of the tremendous amount of wars they fought since the Second World War. And so, they are just riding on the trust that all countries have on them,
Yeah.
And once that trust is broken, the economy might just collapse.
Well, Victor, let's talk a bit about your work. Because tell us a bit about your current research work, what your interests are, what sort of current questions you're looking at in your research.
Well, I have several different kinds of research that I do. I've written several articles on the South China Sea, the geopolitical situation between China and the US in the South China Sea, because that's a very big issue as far as I'm concerned. I believe that if there's ever going to be a hot war, that would be one of the areas that would be picked up, because there no human liabilities would be involved there. The human liabilities will be on military people, personnel, so it is a very likely scenario that the South China Sea would be a place of a war. So that's one thing that I've been very interested in. I've been interested there also because China has taken over or claimed at least 90% of the South China Sea. And that means it's got involved in a very real way as part of the Southeast Asian region itself. And this has made a lot of countries in the region very uncomfortable with it, because they were never considered part of Southeast Asia. But by claiming 90% of the South China Sea, they have claimed in terms of land territory, the countries put together, at least 4 or 5 countries, the South China Sea claim is more than 4 or 5 countries put together. And my other particular area is on environment, climate change. I just had an article on the Indian Ocean, because I think that's a very big area where countries could either come together and try and see how they can cooperate in terms of mitigating either climate change or finding ways to cope, with climate change or adapt to climate change. And there are various models within the Indian Ocean communities that can provide insights into this. So that's the second area that I've been very interested in. And third area, which I deal a lot with Singapore. Just finished the book in Singapore, which should be out by July August or September of this year. And I'm working on another book on Southeast Asia, which deals with folk attitudes towards nature. So
what is the focus of your book on Singapore?
Yeah, well, this book on Singapore, I was looking at the way Westerners looked at Singapore in the colonial period. For 145 years that Britain had the guard over the area as their colonial colony. So I've completed that book, and now we are looking at the editors who are editing the stuff, and hopefully everything will be okay. It's a book that really looks at different aspects of how the West saw Singapore. Yes.
Now, tell us a bit about the pandemic experience in Singapore, because I think tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, June 2nd, there will be a bit of relaxation of some of the circuit breaker restrictions. What are your thoughts on how Singapore has coped during this pandemic?
Well, there are pluses and minuses. I think the fact that, we had very few deaths relative to many other countries. I think it's ironical that the 3 basically Chinese populated polities, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore, had very low deaths as far as the pandemic goes. We've had a much higher percentage of people who have contacted COVID, but they're basically foreign workers. And because most of them are young, they have not had the full-blown aspect of COVID. To a large extent, this idea of COVID deals with the personal ability of a person's health to cope with it. If he's got a good immune system, that he can fight against it. So when you're young, there are very little problems. Most of the people who have died in Singapore, in fact, nearly all of them, have been young or elderly people who have had complications, heart, liver, lungs, kidneys, all that. And these collapse greatly, with a problem like COVID. So you can see even in Europe, the Italians, a huge amount of their deaths dealt with people that were elderly, and they had a system of triage. In fact, they didn't give respirators to people over 60 years because they felt they were not going to recover. So it's terrible. The old people were just allowed to die, so to speak, because of the fact that they were short on particular medical facilities, and this is the problem. I think, you know, when you have this. But I think what you can see is that the issue of COVID has shown us that many Western countries don't have the medical facilities, medical sort of preparedness for a crisis like COVID. And that's why the death rates in all the European countries, in Britain and Italy, Spain, and America, all that, have been so great, you know. And this shows that they've been riding on a sort of a fast, that they had a very good medical system. They actually don't. And what COVID shows is that we have been very weak on that. And this is something that we all got to learn, that, you know, that medical facilities from henceforth have got to be really given a lot more emphasis and more care and money.
Yes. Now, you mentioned that you focus on climate change and environmental issues. Do you think that COVID-19 will have a significant impact on the global effort to address climate change and environmental challenges?
Well, yes and no. I think the fact that COVID has come, it has deflected the global attention to climate change, you know, because obviously the issue of COVID is a more immediate issue. There are deaths that are taking place, you know, a huge amount of deaths. Climate change has got deaths, but it's done indirectly, so one doesn't see it to a large extent. People die of malnutrition and hunger and thirst and what have you in Africa, but nobody sees it as a product of climate change, because you can't really put a one-to-one relationship as you can put with COVID. So this is the problem, I think, to a large extent. So in the issue of how we're going to solve climate change is going to be the long-term, real, slow killer, as it were. There are so many books that have been written on the impact of climate change, even on human. The idea that human beings will not be able to survive this century, in fact. There will be a century where, if we don't look out, already we've dealt with a huge amount of exterminations of nature. It's a book by this lady who wrote this, The Sixth Extinction, which shows that we are in the sixth extinction of since the world began. And it's so colossal that if you wipe out nature, you are invariably wipe out the sort of biological ballast that supports human beings as well. And that will inevitably come. So this is a very dangerous situation that we are in, but a lot of people are not paying attention to it. And they're giving all sorts of excuses for it, unfortunately. But it's a very major issue. And I guess once we get over COVID, the whole issue will, I guess, come back again on climate change and where we take it. The situation is obviously dire with climate change, because most people think that the tipping point, which is given as another 40 years maybe, by 2050, if we don't solve or don't mitigate against climate change, it would be a situation where no amount of money and no amount of technology can save the earth. The issue with snowball, heat waves, rising sea levels, you'll have all sorts of issues snowballing one after another. Already you can see the impact of forest fires, of heat waves, etc., taking place.
Let me just close the circle in our conversation. I mean, you say you need this global cooperation, but can we have that kind of global cooperation if you have U.S., China in some kind of intense economic competition, or even a hot war? But is that even possible to get global cooperation, something as important as climate change?
It is possible depending on how you look at civilization. If you look at civilization that is tied to racial issues between East and West, between whites and blacks, etc., then you cannot get uh, uh, a kind of global cooperation. But if we look at civilization in terms of what Arnold Toynbee talks about, world civilization, the world is being civilized, all of us are being civilized, then it's a different thing. We do things for the whole global community, not for sectarian particular interests. Chinese versus Americans or white versus blacks, and and as what Huntington talks about, the clash of civilization. That's a kind of school that we have been, that has lasted for the last 2,000 years, this idea of East and West. So we have to come to an understanding that we're all in this together as a community, as a global community. Whether you're black or white, whatever you are, Russian, British, Thai, American, etc. If all of us can come together and understand that the benefits are for all of human beings, then obviously we'll be able to close the circle. This guy, Thomas Piketty, the French economist, he said that the tremendous amount of inequality in the world that really is a major cornerstone of the instability in the world can only happen if there's a world war or a major catastrophe. And what we see now is that COVID-19 has brought the whole world and the whole economy down to zero. We start from ground zero. And if we, from ground zero, are able to build a lasting kind of economic system, global system, we will have a more equitable system. It won't be anymore because the old system has already been totally shattered. Billionaires and all have lost billions of dollars. The whole economy has been shredded down to a level. So there are silver linings there, but it's a question of whether we are willing to take these particular lessons and push them forward, or whether we're still in the old school of racism, and class wars, etc., and thinking that I'm this and I should try and keep that for myself, And once you go on that selfish attitude, then there's no way you're going to have a global system of peace and trying to create that harmony that's so much needed.
Victor Savage, thank you very much. That's a very good note on which to end our conversation. Thank you very much for joining us from Singapore. I ask our readers to use the link below in the description to read your article, your and Chris Lim's article, and also to subscribe to Asia Global Online. So thank you again very much, Victor.
Yeah.
And
Christopher and me, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to share our ideas with you and to be able to get our ideas published in your Asia Global Institute. So thank you very much, Al.
Great.
And
thank you very much.
Graham Wong and all for making it possible.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.